It's Great to Be Alive is a presentation of the River Park Foundation.
Teresa McGovern was .339 drunk in a state of acute alcohol intoxication when she passed out and died in a snowbank of exposure.
I suppose the thing I most treasure is the way this somewhat shy person, I don't mean to imply that she shrank from public activity, but somewhat shy person going out and campaigning all over this country for me when I ran for the presidency against Mr. Nixon. She'd get up before 15,000, 20,000 people in a stadium or Madison Square Garden or wherever it was and make a whale of a speech. I couldn't believe all these sophisticated ideas and words were coming out of this 18, 19-year-old young daughter of mine. I treasure that.
George and Eleanor McGovern's daughter, Terry, claimed by alcoholism at the age of 45. Alcoholism is a sneaky disease. It creeps up slowly and steadily, usually over a period of years. If left to run its course, it only gets worse. It doesn't get better. In the next half hour, you will learn about the McGovern family's struggle with their daughter, Terry, and the disease of alcoholism. Terry McGovern had many gifts and abilities to give her family and the world if only her life had not been cut short by this insidious disease. Now the family has decided to try and make her tragic death from alcoholism count for something, to help others understand the disease of alcoholism and to bring this tragedy out into the open. Please join us in our conversation with Senator George McGovern as we discover the treasure of Terry's gifts.
One of the things I've vowed to do is to try to make Terry's death count for something, not simply a tragic, grievous loss, but something positive and beneficial, and I think we're doing that. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that that death has provoked probably 25,000 letters that have come to us from all over the world, all kinds of appearances by me on television and radio and talks around the country, which I'll continue, and I have solid reason to believe that they're helping a lot of people and identifying with their problems and bringing this terrible national disease out in the open.
Death by exposure. It's just one of the many ways alcohol can kill. Alcoholism is the third leading cause of death in our country, and it's our worst drug problem. Alcohol doesn't care who you are or what position you hold in the community. Alcoholism took something precious from former South Dakota Senator George McGovern and his family. It took his daughter. Recently, my father, Glenn Jorgensen, sat down for a father-to-father chat with Senator McGovern about Terry, her disease, and the effects that it has had on the McGovern family. Alcoholism brought a parent's worst nightmare to the McGoverns, the loss of a child.
I heard the doorbell ring. I thought, that's strange. I looked at my watch and it was about 11:30. And as I came downstairs to answer the door, I could see from the light around our door a couple of men out there. One looked like a police officer and the other was a clergyman with a clerical collar. I had a sinking feeling that anyone would come. I'd worried about Terry. I obviously didn't expect anything like this, but they came in and rather quickly came to the point. They said, "Senator, we've got some bad news. Your daughter is dead," and told the story, but as near as they knew it, apparently she had fallen in the snow sometime after 9 o'clock the night before, on the 12th of December, and it was in a deserted area out behind a print shop in a seldom used parking lot, 8 or 10 inches of snow on the ground. I think that she had too much to drink and just collapsed in the snow and froze to death. She was there overnight and up until noon the next day before anyone noticed her.
The story of Terry's struggle with alcoholism began when Terry was in high school.
Terry took her first drink when she was in high school, probably 14, 15 years of age. I'm not sure exactly when. That we lived in a kind of an upper middle class neighborhood in Washington. There was lots of liquor in the neighborhood. It was a post World War II generation. So Terry at one of these neighborhood parties picked up a couple of drinks, and she discovered it was pretty good stuff. That it was easier to be funny and easier to dance with a boy or to get along without any anxiety or nervousness in social circumstances. So instead of one drink, the next time she had a few more. I never saw her inebriated in her high school days, never once. And she was very careful about screening that from Eleanor and me. We just weren't aware of it. But her friends have told me in the years since then that by the time she graduated in high school, while they didn't detect anything you could call alcoholism, that she liked to drink. It was a medication that she found very pleasant.
She found the way to handle some of the stress of life.
Yeah. She always had a great sense of humor. She was even funnier after a couple of beers or a couple of vodkas. And so it seemed like kind of an innocent thing. And apparently it just began building up more and more.
Many parents are relieved when they discover it's only alcohol that their teens are experimenting with and not some illegal drug. But alcohol is a drug, and for every 10 to 15 young people that experiment with it, at least one is already headed down the road to addiction. Well, their drinking may not be heavy enough to be noticeable, especially if heavy drinking is acceptable in their social group. But an increased tolerance to alcohol is one of the early warning signs that a painful road lies ahead.
Most of people can drink a couple of beers or a couple of glasses of wine and they're fine. Nothing happens. An alcoholic can't do that, but they don't discover that until they're addicted. And it's very tough from that point out.
The summer of '68 was a turning point for Terry. She was arrested for marijuana possession in Rapid City. The charge was later thrown out for a faulty warrant, but Senator McGovern was in the middle of a Senate re-election campaign in South Dakota.
That, I guess, was a wake-up call for me. I really began to worry about Terry. And I thought when that thing hit the press, I thought, well, that's the end of my Senate career. I can't expect people in South Dakota to support me if I can't even bring some degree of discipline to my own family. But to my surprise, the state Republicans and Democrats alike rallied around me in that campaign more than any race I ever had. The superintendent of schools in Rapid City told me why. He said every parent in the state is worried that that might happen to their kids someday. It was very widespread in the 60s.
That Rapid City incident triggered shame, guilt, and fear, and led to depression as Terry's life revolved more and more around alcohol.
I think the alcohol was beginning to frighten her at that point. She also was showing the first signs of depression, clinical depression. But in any event, Terry began to develop a dual problem. The alcohol began to take hold in the form of an addiction. We sent her to the University of Virginia psychiatric clinic because she was in deep depression. And they dealt with that problem, I regret to say, without too much attention to the related alcohol problem. She finally, after a couple of years at Charlottesville, which was largely treatment, she finally enrolled at University of South Dakota and graduated there in '76.
Continuing the drinking.
Not only continuing to drink, but her college classmates tell me it's increased steadily. We weren't aware of a lot of this. You might think it's odd that Eleanor and I, as closely as we thought we were watching our kids, we weren't aware how the thing was deepening. And her older sister invited her to come live in Wisconsin after the USD days, and that's when the drinking really became a serious problem. She had difficulty holding a job and difficulty getting up on time, and she put herself into treatment, into an organized alcohol treatment center. But when she'd go into a period of sobriety, the depression would hit her. And she'd medicate the depression by going back to the booze. And that in turn would add to the depression when she was considering the course of her life. So one sort of fed the other. It's like a boxer in a ring hitting you with a right punch and then a left punch, and just when you're getting from your balance of that, another right comes. That's what was happening to her as I think back on it. There was a series of these treatments, and finally, in early, about mid-1980, she finally achieved sobriety that seemed to be permanent. She was sober for about 8 years. And it was during that period she fell in love, had these 2 little girls. She never took a drink when she was pregnant or nursing those 2 little girls. They were the central passions of her life until the day she died. The only thing that rated ahead of them was alcohol. That was the master that cracked the whip over Terry, despite her love for these 2 little girls. But she kept it at bay. I used to call her up and I'd say, how's the battle going today between you and the demon? And she'd say, pretty good, you know. This is my 6th anniversary of sobriety. This is my 7th. This is my 8th. And then one day I raised that question with her, and she said, not so hot. Mm-hmm. And from that day on, roughly 1989, until she died 5 years later, what she had was a series of sobriety periods that were shorter and shorter, and the relapses were quicker and quicker and more severe. She went into the detox center in Madison, the Tellurian Detox Center, 76 times in the last 5 years of her life. That's about once a month. Yeah. On the average. Usually the police would pick her up in a park where she'd fallen, or in a bar where the neighbors would call and they'd come to her house. She'd drink sometimes until she either blacked out or collapsed.
Living in a constant state of psychic pain.
Absolutely.
A social drinker has a choice of whether or not to drink. But for Terry and millions like her, drinking is no longer a matter of choice. Contrary to what many people still believe, the inability to stay sober has nothing to do with a lack of willpower or weak character. The alcoholic is addicted, and the addiction takes over.
She would go into detox for 3 or 4 days and say, I'll never do that again. I'm never going to get drunk again. This is so rotten. I'm just not going to do this anymore. She'd leave the detox center, and by nightfall, she'd be drinking again. The resolve disappeared.
Terry McGovern's struggle with alcoholism is perhaps best symbolized by an incident that occurred during the early stages of her addiction.
She was about 14 or 15 at the time. She drank a couple of beers. She was very young at the time, and that prompted her to leap off the edge of a little embankment she was standing on. Unfortunately, she forgot to take care on the landing. She fell and hit her tailbone on the ground and suffered a fracture. But one of her friends observed that this is the way Terry's life went from then on, a soar into the blue and great euphoria, and then always the crash, what we came to call relapses.
Alcoholism is a disease of the whole person, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And there are several roads to recovery. First, there is the proven program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there are formal treatment facilities with inpatient and outpatient programs. Many people find a combination of 12-step programs and formal treatment to be highly effective.
Another thing that has become very clear is that after an individual, if they're fortunate enough to get some good help, some good therapy, that there has to be an ongoing thing, that this is not a one-time situation. Alcoholism is a lifetime disease, we believe, and it's a study of a lifetime, and you must continue. Did Terry avail herself of ongoing support and groups and so forth?
She was not always the follow-up kind. It was difficult either after a 3 or 4 day detox or after a 4 or 5 week treatment program to get Terry to go into a halfway house or any other kind of extended support group of that kind. On the few occasions when she did that, she achieved rather long periods of sobriety, one of them for, I think, close to 8 years. But that came after a combination of detox, a 28-day treatment, and 6 months in a halfway house. Frankly, I'd recommend that for every alcoholic.
While the drinking is doing damage to the alcoholic, the family fights its own battle with the effects the disease has on them.
How does a family deal through all these years? And you had 3 other daughters and a son?
And a son, yeah, right? 5 altogether.
Could we talk a little about how they reacted to all this, or where they fit into the overall picture?
Our son was absolutely devoted to Terry. He was 3.5 years younger. She was sort of his role model, and I regret to say that it also helped to take him into alcoholism, although I want to quickly add, I think it was a genetic base that made him vulnerable to it. He's doing fine now. But the problem with the family is the difficulty of the siblings trying to understand why Mom and Dad are giving so much more time and energy and love and affection and money and coddling and worrying and everything else to one child. Occasionally, my oldest daughter would say to me, "Dad, it looks like to get attention in this family, you really have to screw up. Maybe I ought to start drinking." She never did, but that was the sentiment that we had to deal with. We were going to take a vacation one time with the entire family, and 2 of my daughters served notice that if Terry went on that vacation, they weren't going to go. Which was painful. It's difficult to say to 2 kids that are doing well and that are not drinking and that are doing well in school that you have to set aside their wishes. You've got to treat everybody the same. They didn't think they were being treated the same. They thought Terry was preempting almost every waking hour of their parents. There's some truth in that. I don't know how you avoid that. It means that you've got to work extra hard to show affection and love and support for the other children. Alcohol is tough on family life.
Well, especially when it goes on, and this covers quite a number of years.
It covers a lot. It covers a lot of years, and we're not wealthy. We're comfortable financially, and we could afford to put Terry into first-rate treatment programs, but when you spend $12,000 or $15,000 helping a person go through a treatment program, and they start drinking on the way home from the treatment after 28 days or 6 weeks or whatever it is, your first impulse is to say, "Get out of the car. I don't want to see you for 6 months."
Certainly.
Just as the alcoholic needs help in dealing with alcoholism, the family needs help in learning how to deal with the alcoholic. Family members, you need to seek out 12-step programs like Al-Anon and professionals who are trained in chemical dependency issues.
Was your family, did they were able to avail themselves of any specialized counseling about the disease?
Yes, we benefited from the Al-Anon program. That helps give members of an alcoholic's family the same understanding of the disease and its nature as the alcoholic gains from going to AA meetings and reading the big blue book and all those things. But I must say, Glenn, to be frank about this, I didn't pursue that as much as I should have. I sometimes found those Al-Anon meetings kind of boring, and I was always busy with other things, and I kind of resented, frankly, that I had to go out when I'd rather be doing something else and sit around listening to a lot of people talk about the problems with their wives or their spouses or their kids. I found it sometimes kind of difficult. In retrospect, I wish I had done more of that. I think that it might have enabled me to better understand Terry if I had heard more of the stories of other people living with alcoholics.
It's important, Senator, I think, for families to spend just a couple more minutes on that, to realize that whatever they do, no matter how much they try, and the efforts that they make, they can't make that individual have sobriety. And they have their lives that they have to live, so they somehow have to understand that they should do all that they can and support and love and reinforce. But that they need help themselves to live their lives under those conditions. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. Just as the alcoholic has to confess powerlessness over that disease, it's too powerful for anybody to contain just by sheer willpower. It's an enormously powerful, insidious disease. If the alcoholic can't get on top of it, obviously the family can't dictate a course of action that's going to help that alcoholic get over it. You can make recommendations, you can make suggestions, but lectures and sermons and rebukes and admonitions and complaints, they accomplish nothing other than probably to reduce the self-esteem of the alcoholic. So you have to recognize your own powerlessness, accept it with a certain amount of grace, and not spend all your associations with the alcoholic complaining about their behavior. It doesn't work, and it's also unsettling and frustrating for the family. I do think there's a role families can play in dealing with alcoholism. They can engage in interventions to help the alcoholic confront their problem. They can encourage the AA program or treatments or things of that kind. But they need to be fortified in whatever they do by getting professional help themselves. And that means talking to alcoholics. It means going to the Al-Anon meetings. It means reading the good literature on the field and trying to learn something about it. It's a long time struggle for the family as well as the alcoholic to learn how to live with that disease. That's why if I have any regret, and I have a number of regrets, one of them is that I didn't really seek more insight and understanding for how I ought to conduct myself as the father of an alcoholic.
Families of alcoholics can help themselves and the alcoholic by educating themselves about the disease. They can help themselves by letting go of their denial, by admitting their own pain, and by acknowledging that they can't handle this problem on their own. Then they can move from anger and resentment to acceptance and healthy detachment.
And I finally decided I've just got to make a separation between my love for Terry, and I did love her till the day she died, and my hatred of this lousy disease she has. It's perfectly all right to get mad as hell at alcoholism and what it's doing to your loved ones. What is not permissible is to permit that disease to develop a resentment and an anger and a frustration against the alcoholic. So we just have to learn how to love the alcoholic or the other drug addict and despise and fight the illness that afflicts them.
I would presume that you went through some feelings of guilt, resentments, fears, angers, and this kind of thing. Could you tell us a little bit about what your experience was?
The hardest thing for me to do the last few months since Terry's death is to quit beating up on myself. And frankly, no one of us is perfect. We have made mistakes. I've made mistakes. I'm sure our family has. What you have to do is to ask forgiveness for those mistakes, and then quit beating up on yourself for the things that you probably don't deserve to be hit for. After all, there comes a point where in dealing with a disease like this, the alcoholic has to take the main responsibility for recovery. And if that breaks down, the family probably can't be held responsible.
Family members, You need to remember that you did not cause this disease. You can't control it. You can't cure it. But you can cope with it and learn about it as you learn to love the alcoholic through it all.
Senator, out there is some father that's struggling with what do I do about my daughter, recognizing that we don't have any simple answers. What would you tell them?
I'd tell them never to let their love waver for that child. No matter how irritated, how frustrated, how disappointed, to remember that that alcoholic child needs their love and needs to feel your arms around them, maybe more than a child without that illness. Always make sure that that child, even at the depths of drunkenness, relapses, whatever, that they know that Dad still loves them.
The McGoverns have experienced pain and heartbreak as a result of Terry's alcoholism, but there were good times too, times when their love for Terry and her love for them resulted in the special gifts of caring that only family members can give.
You know, I'm a long-time politician, so I think about political incidents, but when she was 7 years old, I ran for Congress the first time. That was 1956. And I didn't have a dime. When I started that campaign, I had to go out and raise the money, a few dollars at a time. And she heard her mother and I talking about campaign financing headaches. So she broke open her piggy bank, set up a little stand out in the front yard and sold candy bars to raise money for the campaign. Her business judgment was not quite as good as her enthusiasm. She paid a dime for these candy bars and sold them for a dime. But nonetheless, it represented an indirect transfer of her money into the campaign. She could have just given me the bank, but I treasured the fact that she stood out there in the hot sun. And if some kid came along and didn't have a dime, she might give it to them for nothing, providing he'd agree to put up some signs for her dad. That was at the age of 7. Since then, I've raised tens of millions of dollars in political contributions, including the presidential efforts. There isn't one of those dollars I treasure as much as Terry's dimes.
Senator McGovern and his family are working through their grief and pain to find the treasure of Terry's gifts, the gift of lessons to other families to never give up hope on a loved one.
The gift of encouragement to those suffering from alcoholism, because although Terry's story does not have a happy ending, tens of thousands of alcoholics have been able to achieve sobriety.
Hope and help are possible. We know that people who are suffering from alcoholism and their families can learn that it's great to be alive.
If you would like more information about alcoholism or about obtaining a copy of this program or other It's Great to Be Alive programs for use in your church, school, or community group, call River Park at 605-224-6178.